Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network. I know you probably have heard this phrase, maybe it's a cliche, from back in the day, you are what you eat. And if you think it's just a passing phrase that doesn't really have a lot of weight, if you will, no pun intended, you're wrong. It really does mean something. And it was said many years ago, I believe it was Socrates said, food is medicine. And when you think of it that way, wow. And all of this is totally true. How does what you eat affect you physically? But today we're going to look at how it affects you mentally. Yeah, your mental health. I found somebody who coaches people with this all the time, specifically women. And she helps them with their wellness and all of their concerns, and even super serves retired military women. She is one of those women, and she's back with us. Lorraine, Coach Lorraine, joins us on the program. Welcome back. How are you?
I'm doing great, Steve. I'm glad to be back with you. How are you today?
I'm well. Doing well. Quite honestly, wondering what I'm going to have for lunch because I didn't plan that out today, but I have a little bit of time that I can jump out and get something. But I always try to gravitate toward, what's a healthier choice? I'm being mindful of it. Am I nailing it the way it should be? No, because I don't have Coach Lorraine. But let's talk about what we eat and how it affects our mental health. There really, really is a correlation between the two, right?
Definitely there is. There is. And it's something that new research has opened up new avenues for us to explore and improve on as we go.
When we talk about that connection, what are some of the things that we might experience if we're not eating the right thing when it comes to our mental health?
So there's two things. There's things that impact us in the immediate situation, and then there's the long-term impacts. So short-term, of course, I think many of us always experience the lethargic feeling we have after eating a high-carb meal in particular, and that can really, especially for the start of the day, that doesn't really set our day off very well if we're not eating things that will energize us, not just physically, but even mentally.
And I'm sure other things like brain fog and concentration issues also come into play there, right?
Very much so. Some people think, the quick fix can be caffeine, but that's, a quick fix. If you didn't eat what you shouldn't have eaten in the first place, then maybe you wouldn't have to rely on caffeine, even though caffeine is very enjoyable. I love my cup of coffee once a day. But if we're mindful of what we eat, even from the night before, the next morning, then we don't have to deal with the impact it would have on us in the long term.
Are there certain things that we could talk about in terms of food and things that you might want to stay away from? Personally, I don't do caffeine. Just doesn't work for me. I get all jacked up, and I love coffee. I'm actually thinking about ordering a cup right now. But there are those things that I would imagine that we definitely want to stay away from.
Well, definitely. So anything is good in moderation, like coffee, like you said. But one of the things we need to be mindful of is that the way in which our brain functions. Yes, glucose within itself is the fast burner, what we do on a daily basis, what our brains consume. What is more impactful and that lasts longer in our bodies if we consume proteins and fats. So staying away or minimizing our carbohydrate intake for each meal, especially in the mornings, sets us off to a good start. Avoiding high-sugar cereals, for example, that our bodies are going to just burn off and just fuel our brain and give us that mental slump is not a good choice. Substituting that morning bagel and that donut for something that's more lasting, because once again, that's high carb, and it doesn't set us off for a good start.
I eat sometimes odd things at odd times. Like my breakfast is 3 turkey meatballs, a little bit of marinara sauce, just so it's not so dry and has a little bit of flavor. I used to have an English muffin with it. I've now cut back to half an English muffin because, like you just said, why have all those carbs? maybe a tiny bit of butter. But it's interesting how things change. If you went back, say, 15 years ago, people would say, or, what we perceive to be the experts, butter is bad for you, bad, bad, bad. Use a butter substitute. And now it's don't use the butter substitute. Butter is actually okay for you. It's a decent fat. This is my understanding, to have in your system. So I think it's a delicate balance, like you say. Some people cut out all their fat. You need fat. Same thing. We need carbs. Maybe less carbs, though, right?
Definitely. So, some of the things we've fallen off the bandwagon with is really looking at the history as how we got to where we are right now, how other things have influenced us in what they say we should or shouldn't eat. Now, of course, I'm trying to influence people in a positive way, and I hope it's taken positively in the same sense. And that's why I encourage people to do the research and not just take things as it's dished out to us. If you think back to the, prior to the industrial age, there wasn't refrigerators, and we used to eat leftovers. We did fine on leftovers, but people don't want to eat leftovers anymore. Everybody wants something fresh and getting that fresh bagel at the things in the morning. Those leftovers had a decent fat content to it, and we were healthier with less heart attacks, less mental fog, basically, and we would get through the day. Then came the Industrial Revolution, where we needed that quick fix in the mornings, and the whole thing of cereals and quick fixes came into play, and we become dependent on those things and not realizing how it's impacted us over the years. Because now that we've been reliant on these things, this is when heart attacks, diabetes, and all these chronic diseases have now escalated, if you look at the correlation of these things. So now we are pulling back and say, well, what has fats been doing to our bodies? So fats was good when they decided society that fats were so-called not good for us. That is actually when increase in sugar came into play. So what was it? Was it the sugar or was it the fat? And people assume that because you're getting fat, it must be the fat that's making us fat and not the sugar. Turns out it was actually the sugar and not the fat. And like you said, Steve, we need fat. We need fat, which tends to turn out in our body as cholesterol. Our hormones are made from cholesterol or from fats. A lot of our cell function needs fats to basically make us healthy. So we shouldn't eliminate fat. We should just consume healthy fat. And that does include moderate amount of either animal fat from different sources, whether it be an egg, things that butter, and things of those nature. Eat healthy, eat natural, and we're on a great start.
It's, we talk about doing the research. Sometimes you're not really sure what you're looking at. So I think we have to take that with a grain of salt, because even I remember it was, probably 15 years ago as well, where it was said, oh, wait a minute, do not, steak, red meat, stay away from that, cholesterol. Not so much the case now. You don't hear that anymore. I don't know if that was some groups that were lobbying against eating red meat or beef. Now, granted, it's my understanding, don't have a lot of red meat, maybe once a week or whatever it might be. But there was a scare at one point. I remember even, growing up thinking that, oh, wow, yeah, cholesterol. We need cholesterol. It's actually okay for you as long as your cholesterol is in check.
That is correct. And it's an individual thing. There are some people, because of their gene makeup, the cultural history and different things, some people manage cholesterol a lot better than others. So that's where functional medicine comes into play, because they look at you as an individual and not try to put you in the numbers and make you a numbers game. And that's one of the things that I'm totally against, where doctors kind of try to compare you with. There should be a certain level of comparison, but don't put me in the hat with everybody else. I'm my own individual, culturally, biologically, and so forth. So, yeah, cholesterol is good for us. It's something that we need. And the whole red meat phenomenon, that's actually come up into the headlines again recently. There is a group, we won't get into what that group is, who are now, and they're basically along the vegan and vegetarian mindset, and basically they're saying that red meat is no good for us anymore. But if it's coming from that source, you should question it. What is their long game? What are they actually looking for? And not just take it for what it is. Because there are, even though we can get all our amino acids that we need from vegetable source, meat is always the most available. It has the most bioavailable amino acids for human consumption. So that's always one of the best sources. And we've always eaten meats.
Right, but think of it that way. It goes back to cave people. That was part of our diet. Now, granted, and this is for a whole other podcast, the meat sources have changed with growth stimulants and things like that. That's for a whole other topic. And we can go into, grass-fed beef and, where you're buying it from. I actually started buying, a friend of mine bought a farm upstate from where I am here. And I've been getting my meat from him. And it's frozen, but it's fast frozen. Oh, my gosh. So much better than going to the supermarket. And I know it's fresh and there's no, the animals aren't being injected or anything like that. So maybe, I guess, consider the source. How about some other things that we definitely want to stay away from when it comes to our diet and supporting our mental health?
The main thing is no matter what your diet is, whether you're a vegetarian or carnivore-based or keto, whatever your diet path is, processed foods is one of the biggest things I think we all agree on that we need to avoid as much as possible. Doesn't mean that we can't treat ourselves to a pack of potato chips every now and then, but the more whole and natural the food is the better it is for us. And even in terms of in the hospitals, I think in some hospitals, some of the food sources are not necessarily the best. Yes, it may be filling at the time, but is it really the best for our ailing patients that are in institutions that can't look at different selections? So processed foods is probably the highest thing on the list, no matter where you're from.
Yeah. What about organic?
So organic food, I think, is beneficial at the core, but it's not available to everyone across, economic situations.
Sure.
So you kind of have to be mindful of where someone is. Eat as much organic food as you can, and that's available to you, but just make sure that if you don't have that option readily available to you, that you just look for the best source, something that is as natural as it possibly can.
Would you say, if you can afford it, that it's worth it?
Yes, it definitely is. I mean, if it's not organic, then you don't know what insecticides or hormones or whatever they've treated those things with. I think back to a study, this was, the U.S. was doing studies on cows, I believe it was, I think it was either Puerto Rico or Cuba. And this was some years ago. And they were giving cows hormones to help milk production. And the kids in that community or in that area were actually getting the milk from those cows. And they were wondering why the young kids were getting breast. And it turned out that the hormones that they were giving the cows was actually being passed into the milk and being consumed by people in the community. So when they petitioned and got them to stop giving those cows those hormones, it was no longer a problem. But that's a simple evidence of what goes into a cow, how it can impact us in the long term. And, who wants to have a boy with breast,
Yep.
Or even your daughter getting her
period early.
Yeah. Exactly. That's not a nightmare you want to deal with. Like, Mom, what's happening with you? That's I as a girl in school, and that might have been one of the problems I had. Who knows? I remember as a young teen, myself, there was a couple of us who were more mature than others, and we would get picked on for being more mature because when we were walking, we're jiggling, and that was.
Yep.
It wasn't nice.
But I'm totally with you. I'm totally with you in wondering or hearing those things that the growth hormones and it wasn't on our radar.
No.
Even as parents, I have a 28-year-old and a 15-year-old. It wasn't on my radar back then, but then it started, cropping up like, wait a minute, how come kids are different now? Why are they developing differently? And of course, I'm sure, growing up, it was like, got milk, got to have milk, got to have a glass of milk. It's good for you, which I did, and I was an overweight kid. So I attribute probably some of that to my weight situation back then.
Yep, definitely. And it's this thing. I think about, when we talk about what we eat, we go back to the research. I think of most of the people in the research and health industry have knows of Ansel Keys, who did that 7-country food study. And that was for us to eliminate fat from our diet, basically. That was the gist of what that study was about. And come to find out, even though he published a 7-country study, he actually did 20 countries, but he cherry-picked the countries that would support his theory and disregarded, basically, the countries that opposed his study. So this, by making the point of, be mindful of the sources of the information that's been provided to you. Because Ansel Keys is one of the biggest researchers that impacted the way we eat in this country, and which has impacted how other countries established the American standard diet, and that has spread all over the world. So who standardized it for us? It wasn't necessarily our picking. Who told them that that's the standard? It wasn't made a reckoning from God, if that's what our belief is. It was some folks that got together and came up with this bright idea that this is how we need to eat. And it's not going to be the same across the globe. It's going to be different.
I'm glad you said that, because I kind of was alluding to it before in terms of where's the information come from. You need to take it with a grain of salt when you see these things and make sure the sources are reputable, i.e. all the studies that we were talking about that got reversed. So we don't know who was lobbying for what back then, but certainly consider the sources. What other thoughts do you have when it comes to our mental health? And I'm glad we're talking about this today, because so many times when we talk about diet, it's directly connected to our physical health. Lose weight, be in better shape, be healthier. But we never tie it into the mental health. So I'd love for any kind of thoughts that you might have from this point.
Well, in particular, when it comes to, I think about my military comrades. So over the years, when we're especially deployed or any other situation that we're in, we are basically given a certain diet of food. And carbs, high-carb meals is always the quick fix and the easiest thing to get to locations where we might be. And there's a tendency, or there has been shown a tendency, that these high-carb meals has impacted us to cause or correlation with depression, anxiety, where in the long term, maybe the PSTD has been the long-term effects, and not really exploring how the food that we've eaten has elevated that situation. Not that it's necessarily caused it, but has elevated that situation. They've looked at how someone who does consume high carbs essentially are more prone to anxiety and depression, to the point where it's well known that there's been years that doing a low-carb diet helps people who have epilepsy, for example. And this is children as well as diets. So we may think that we're healthy, but until you make that change, you don't know how much more healthier you can be. I know for myself that cutting back on my carbohydrate intake, that my cognitive ability has improved. And I think this is something that as individuals that we should explore. There is nothing to stop us as individuals to do the experiment and eliminate certain things from our diet, and just to see how we feel whether it be over a 2-week or 30-day time frame, and then that way we can get put a finger on exactly how certain things impact us as an individual. When you are eating carbs, don't eat them. There's a research person that says, don't eat your carbs naked. Always combine it with fats. Always put, butter on your bread. Eat gravy with your rice, and things of that nature. When you're sitting to eat your meal, don't eat the carbs first. I've never really gave much thought to how, when they serve meals in a fancy restaurant in certain countries, that would get served a salad first, and then the meal comes afterwards.
Sure.
Then the dessert at the end.
Yep.
That's because the way in which our bodies react to the foods that we eat. If we eat something, a vegetable, which is the fiber, and the fat first, with your salad dressing, for example, it primes your body to process your carbohydrates in a much more efficient manner. So protein, high fiber, and fats, consume those things first, then you can treat yourself to the carbs. Push those muffins. I love to go to I used to go to Red Lobster a lot, and those cheese muffins that they put on the table were always tempting. So the best thing is to push those to the side and eat your meal first and treat yourself to the bread and dessert at the end.
I hear all different things. Somebody told me, a couple of people did, that you really should start with your dessert. I don't know why, but it's better to start with that than to end in terms of your body. It was a nutritionist that told me that, and actually 2 separate ones did. I don't know if kids would say that's a great idea, but I don't know if that would truly support you. I'm one of those people, I don't even do dessert. It's very rare. It doesn't do anything for me anymore, and I think that's maybe just conditioning over time where sweets don't resonate with me like they did when I was younger. One part of me is like kind of sad. The other part of me is like, hey, that's great. But then again, there's things that you can eat for dessert that are actually pretty good for you. Be it fruit with a little bit of maybe a little cream on top, whipped cream, whatever it might be. Do you think it's a good idea to keep a journal of what you eat and also the food and the mood connection, since we're talking about mental health?
That is a good thing. Everything depends on the objective that you're trying to accomplish. So some people eat a varied amount of different foods. So yes, then they will have to journal it, and at least you can keep track of things as you go along. But like I said, it depends on where you are and what your objective is. If you truly think that you need to monitor these things and share that with your medical professionals, that is actually a great thing to do.
Excellent. Somebody wants to work with you, and I truly believe that you need to work with somebody on all of this. You can do it alone to some extent, but many times you're going to fail. And that's just the reality of it. You need the accountability. Somebody to, when you have a question, hey, you know what? I'm thinking about, eating this, or I want to change my diet here. How do we start the process with you?
So one of the great things to start with me is starting up on my 21-day reboot program, and just to kind of get a feel if this is something that you'd like to do. So you can go to my website, lorrainecuff.com, and find the link to start that program, or even choose to just do a consult and see where we can explore what goals and what things you need to accomplish for yourself.
I love it. And I love that you harness the power of functional medicine, and you coach, but also you have an eye on the health aspect of it, which is so important. And here comes another Steve cliche. Your health is everything. You could have so much money, but if your health degrades, sometimes you can't get it back, and the money situation is not going to help you. So make the wise investment in yourself. Lorraine Cuff, LorraineCuff.com, LorraineCuff.com. Lorraine, great having you on here. Love all your insight. It almost seems like we're on the same page when it comes to a lot of this. And I got to figure out what I'm having for lunch today. I don't know.
Make sure it's healthy, Steve.
Yes. Well, that's why I haven't made that decision yet. But I appreciate you. Thank you so much for joining us today.